Rosa, the first historical of the Chibnall era. Spyfall Part 1, the game-changing Series 12 premiere. Co-writer Malorie Blackman participated in an audio commentary for Rosa, and showrunner Chris Chibnall led a commentary for Spyfall Part 1. Both writers add all sorts of revelations and insights into the already rich and heady conversations about those episodes, and all the topics that spring out from them. More than any Chibnall-era commentaries we've looked at so far, these ones really tap into ideological underpinnings behind this era, as well as broader genre trends, as well as continuing to build on the conversations around writing inspiration, controversy, authenticity, attitudes towards history, differing audience versus creator relationships towards the show, all those sorts of topics we've explored in our earlier Chibnall-era commentary discussions. Commentating on these two commentaries today will be myself, Neo from Australia, along with my English friends Ingiga and Oliver. As with our other commentary discussions, we will listen to various clips from the commentary tracks that I've chosen as particularly interesting and relevant to our ongoing discussions. We'll chat and comment on those, then move on to the next clip, and so on. First, let's dive into Rosa. On Rosa's commentary track, we have co-writer Malorie Blackman, our Yaz Mandip Gill, and Series 11 and 12 producer Alex Mercer, who you may remember from the Demons of the Punjab commentary. Now, Rosa is a co-authored script between Malorie Blackman and Chris Chibnall. When it comes to co-authored scripts, I think there's a real tendency to lay all the perceived good things at the feet of the writer people might find it easier to like, and all the bad things at the feet of the writer people might hold less goodwill towards.
I'm guilty of that.
Yes, as Gig says, it's a common attitude. I often see people have a lot of presumptions on what aspects of Rosa must have come from Chris Chibnall and what aspects must have come from Malorie Blackman. We'll get into that topic among loads of other ones as we go. For now, let's start with the first Rosa commentary clip I've selected.
What I love about this episode is it just gets straight to the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Mallory, you can talk more about it than I, but I think starting with this scene was so important to see. It's such a, this is a moment that happened in Rosa's life, and it happened 12 years before we meet her. I think it's 12 years, and we get to see her character. It's about her. The team haven't arrived yet. We see her strength, we see her bravery, we see her determination, we see her running with Blake.
I think it's really important that we see this, actually, because it shows that it wasn't just in 1955 and it just happened. It was a long-running thing. All through her life she's had to deal with things like this, and in fact, if anything, this is understated because it was pouring with rain when this happened in real life, and then he wouldn't let her back on, drove off, and then she had to walk sort of like 5 miles home.
Yeah. Once he'd taken her money.
Yes, exactly. But apparently that used to be a common trick from drivers. If they thought sort of coloureds were getting a bit too uppity, they would take the money and drive off.
And now, just that caption, 12 years later. There's been 12 years of that Rosa has lived in.
Well, it's not even 12 years. Her whole life has been about that. Because there was an incident when she was a child, and a white boy assaulted her, punched her, and she hit him back. And then the white boy's mum came to her mum and said, your child doesn't do that. And then Rosa was, well, he shouldn't hit me. And so she always stood up for herself, even as a child.
Yeah.
So similar to Nina and Tesla there, Malorie Blackman clearly has a lot of information about Rosa and a lot of care about Rosa Parks.
It's interesting because, as I'm sure will bear out as we're talking, I really like Malorie Blackman, but I don't think this episode works.
Yeah.
In basically any way. I think a lot of it comes through in that little bit there where there's so much care and, I'm looking for a better word than accuracy, given to this part of Rosa Parks' story and in depicting the conditions she was struggling through. And then you smash cut to the TARDIS arriving and they're all having a laugh about, and it's jarring and it doesn't feel like they fit into the story. In the same way that Demons is built around the presence of those characters, and it's not like an active role that they're playing in the story of Partition, but it's their presence is important. I don't get the sense that the narrative presence of Doctor Who really fits with the rest of the story here.
I noticed that Blackman seems to want to undo one misconception, in the sense of the idea that if anyone thought that the famous bus incident was the only one, then she starts off with one that happened earlier on that's less well known, and that's one thing. But then elsewhere in the episode, maybe she doesn't really fight other misconceptions that people might have about Rosa Parks. So it's like stuff that's to do with buses, for example, the famous bus scenario, that gets a lot of like attention to detail, and we need people to know about the truth about this. But then that's kind of it. Like, it doesn't extend any further beyond that. So I guess it's just a whole overall project of compartmentalizing which bits of this story are kind of going to get lots of coverage and which bits aren't, really. Because it's kind of ideological.
I think it's quite telling, the description there, that, we needed this scene before Doctor Who enters into it to set things up. It's almost a little bit of foreshadowing that, the way this is going to function as a Doctor Who episode is going to be strange. You know, the fact we need to have a non-Doctor Who-y iteration of it at first to kind of establish things, I guess, might speak to the uncomfortable way I think Doctor Who fits into this story as it's going to be portrayed.
There's that question of actionability, or sort of applicability, that this era bumps up against a lot. With something like Kablam spends a lot of energy and effort depicting the conditions and that they're bad, and then goes, don't use violence ever, and then offers no other solution, no other way around, and shrugs its shoulders. You know, the most positive reading of Kablam is that there's not a solution to the problem. But Witchfinders presents no real ability to enact change. And, you know, Oxygen is an oversimplification of the resistance against capital, but it gives you a direction. It says this is how you do it. It lays out some actionable groundwork on which people can learn. Rosa very much doesn't. The whole role of the TARDIS team in it is this sort of uncomfortable. They don't fit into the story. Like you said, they don't fit thematically, they don't fit tonally. It's wrong that they're there. And that ends up breeding this position where their narrative clashes so hard with the actual narrative of the history, and there's nothing actionable in the episode at all. You can't watch the episode and learn how to, as, you know, an insert like the TARDIS team. There's nothing there to learn from about how to deal with systemic oppression. So it ends up being this unactionable sort of history book version.
It's maybe part of the danger of entering into a series with, I want to do the Partition story and I want to do the Rosa Parks story, in that you're kind of entering into it backward in a way, which is just, it's somehow how TV works. You know, you'll have the brief and then you need to work off it. But it's like the kind of square peg round hole kind of thing, trying to fit Doctor Who. I want the Doctor Who Rosa Parks episode to exist. So how do we get those two things working together?
On that structural note of starting off with the scene with Rosa before having the TARDIS team come in, like, nominally on the face of it, on surface level, that's like a really normal structure for like a Doctor Who or like a historical, not necessarily a celeb historical, but for a Doctor Who story, cold open, you have some stuff happening, then the Doctor turns up. But in this case, the thing that's happening before the Doctor turns up, rather than it there being in like an alien attack or anything supernatural like that, it's just something quite real and traumatic and awful to do with racism. So it's like, I guess that's where kind of the tonal awkwardness comes from, in the sense of it's not your regular Doctor Who cold open where we're setting up the problem the Doctor has to deal with, because it's actually setting up a problem the Doctor cannot deal with at all before having us show up.
Yeah.
I think, to give some credit, that's possibly an intentional move, because it has all the flavour of a Doctor Who cold open. You know, a character who's going to be important later on comes up against a problem that's introducing the audience to a threat that we're going to deal with across the episode, and it's scary and it's horrific, and it ends on a sort of upsetting note, which we would then sting into the titles if we had title stings in this series. And I think there's something quite interesting in that you position the concept of systemic racism as the monster of the week, to the degree that the actual monster of the week is just a racist. There's something in that, I think, in positioning this as something that Doctor Who can't deal with. I think there's a story in that. I'm not convinced it works, but I think there might be some intentionality there on Blackman's part.
I think the issue, we'll get into this more later, but the issue there is I think how much the episode is about maintaining things, which kind of sits uneasily with, let's put in this bigger social issue than Doctor Who can deal with, and let's do an episode all about how we have to maintain how things happen. Yeah, I find that an awkward combination.
It's essentially a full episode out of that mind wipe.
Yeah.
At the end of Spyfall 2. It's that problem made into a full 45-minute TV.
I should elaborate before we do the next clip. I spoke of it vaguely earlier, the ways people assume one co-writer did this and one co-writer did that. Specifically with this episode, what you see a lot is people think the sci-fi stuff was probably Chibnall and the Rosa Parks historical stuff was probably Malorie Blackman. And then coming off that, the things that don't feel right are probably Chibnall, the insensitive bits or the weirdly liberal bits even are probably Chibnall, and the bits that are more affecting are probably Malorie. So whether that's right or wrong, would you guys agree that's generally the assumptions you see swirl around the episode?
Yes, can confirm, having made such assumptions myself in the past.
For sure. I think it's interesting in that Blackman's writing, at least that I'm familiar with, is very much focused on the sort of depicting, in many ways, the minutiae of racism, if you want microaggressions and whatnot, the living with it, right, is the focus of a lot of her writing, I think incredibly powerfully, but that's sort of the opposite of what this episode is, which makes racism into a historical event to be explored. And you can see them talking about it here with the 12 years later, the implication aimed for being to show that this is the world, right? That this is the life that Rosa Parks and every other minority in the country is living with. But it ends up feeling more like these are two discrete, unique instances of racism that just need to be overcome heroically, and that will lead to Obama being president, right?
And then fixing the recession. So this is another one where it's two, but there's no gap between them because they're linked.
Oh, this scene is hard to watch.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Got this.
Now this I loved writing.
Whoa! Stop! Sir, please, take a step back.
It's when this episode aired, I saw some comments online of people, people truly shocked and obviously taking on board, that never experienced, because you experience something in a drama, what our character's going through, but also just shocked that that's the way it was, and just like,
You crazy.
if you doubt that's the way it was, just go and read the statute book, read the laws of the time.
And not even that many years ago.
Yes, exactly.
Words to a white woman in Mississippi
And laws designed to, this is probably getting too political, but laws designed
in the river,
scared of coloured people, as they call them, and when white people getting together, but the fear that they might actually get on or become one society.
You all together?
Yes.
Well, the fact that it was law, the whole segregation, and it was supposed to be separate but equal, but of course there's no such thing. And so these Jim Crow laws about sort of coloured fountains and white fountains, and a coloured library and a white library, and the coloured library was never as well equipped as the white library, and so on. And I think it's because I read her autobiography, I read a number of biographies and autobiographies before I even did the outline for this, and you sort of get get that story, but it's not. It's there's another dimension to it when you see it sort of acted out. And
Can you believe
you know, so that's even that scene where poor Ryan is slapped, and it was. I just love the way this gets straight into it with the sort of on the coach and then here and they're straight into the story. And what I'm proud of on this one is that it didn't pull any punches as far as showing the reality of what it was like in 1955, which is why it's interesting when they land and Graham's first comment is, "Oh, 1955, can we see Elvis? Can we see Elvis?" And I thought, if I landed in 1955 and I heard it was Montgomery, Alabama, it would be, hell no, can we leave, please?
Yeah.
I think Blackman's writing of the cavalier jaunting through history that white characters can do. I think that's a really interesting nugget. And I think that's something that is quite effective about the episode is the positioning of the past as a hostile alien world, right? The idea that it's a dangerous place to be for certain people. I think that's really effective.
Yeah, it's something that the show needed to confront for a long time.
In a way that Doctor Who hasn't explored all that much, right? There's been so much, you know, just walk around like you own the place. That's not how history works.
I like that guy saying, "Oh, I might be getting a bit too political here," when you're just about to talk about something that was, you know, just a fact, you know, something that was just, yeah.
The producer also said earlier, just misspeaking, how Rosa had to live 12 years of the racism, and Mallory was like, well, no, all the years.
Yes, that seemed the first time she'd ever gotten on a bus. She had to give you 12 years of getting on buses.
And then him talking about the online commenters shocked about racism. It's all a bit, yeah.
Yeah, that conversation about how people today don't know how bad racism was when racism was a thing.
I think some people might have a good idea.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of people quite aware of what racism's like.
I guess it's just like, it's that inherent thing, like the audience this is aimed at are also kind of the people producing it and to some extent partly like making it, acting in it or whatever. So it's just kind of like, you just get that singleness of mindset and maybe a lack of seeing other points of view, I don't know.
Back then, there was racism in the laws.
God, imagine that, a racist law. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Interesting, Mallory talking about reading several biographies and then also talking about doing the script outline. I found that interesting. Also great that she read a lot of biographies. I get the sense that Nina read a lot of stuff as well. So that's always good.
See, I'm kind of conflicted about the whole Ryan getting slapped thing, because on one hand, like, I actually agree with Blackman that it's actually really interesting to undercut that whole, oh yeah, history is awesome thing by having something really horrible happen to the companion. But at the same time, like, I kind of hate that, like, for Ryan, you know, not only his first trip into history, but like the first time a story is about him being a black guy, and it's just like one where we get a slow motion shot of him being like getting slapped across the face. Like, it's something about it feels, sensationalist isn't the right word, but like exploitation isn't the right word either. But there is something uncomfortably like showy about it all. Like, wow, racism. Whoa, epic, so epic. I don't know.
It feels very staged in a way, yeah. I think that's compounded by how the clip is used. I know both of us hate Series 11 Blu-ray trailer, which like times it to music.
Yeah.
Like in a gimmicky way. What was the deal with the laughter and the commentary around that scene there?
Well, the one we just watched.
The altercation with Ryan.
I guess maybe like, not like necessarily nervous laughter, but I guess a degree of like, when something kind of scary or exciting or whatever is happening, or something like dark, and they're commentating it, they're looking back on it, you know, I think... I think we get some of that in Spyfall 2 as well, actually. Kind of like, oh, this is dark, isn't it? I guess that sort of,
yeah.
I guess you sort of grapple with the, I guess maybe the awkwardness of like watching something back by kind of being a bit jocular about it. I don't know.
Yeah. For these people also, like, they know Tosin, you know, and like it's for us, we've experienced this just as an episode. For them to have seen rushes over and over again, I think they're probably really desensitized to the scenes in a way that we wouldn't be, which is also context.
Yeah. I think I agree that there's something just uncomfortable. And obviously it's meant to be uncomfortable, but there's something not right about the way that that whole scene is staged. It feels, I don't know, the episode as a whole struggles between that comparison between the past as a dangerous place in a way that the Doctor Who hasn't done in a long time. That feels sometimes, when it's comparing the alienness of history to the alienness of actual alien worlds, sometimes it feels like it steps over the line into making it so alien it's sort of inapplicable. Or you get that note later in the episode where Ryan explains how racism persists in his life today, and in the context of that scene, I can't help feel like that should be evident. It should be clear that this society isn't a unique vestige of racism as it once historically existed, but a perhaps more openly, violently expressed form of the racism that has existed for a very long time and persists entirely to today. So it ends up feeling like a weird grace note that, oh, by the way, also racism still exists now.
I feel, to an extent, the episode to me feels like Racism the episode, where like Demons of the Punjab didn't feel to me like Racism the episode or Colonialism the episode or even Partition the episode. It felt like This Family in the Partition the episode to me. Rosa, to me, feels like it's trying to be weighty and didactic and encompassing in a way that is awkward. It's trying to do a lot of big things and be big and have this kind of social scale in a way I don't get with some of the other episodes that get criticised for, political reasons in the Chibnall era. And I think part of the conversations about racism and the interactions regarding racism in it feel that way is because it kind of feels like it's trying to be the big racism episode in a way. Does that make any sense? Do you guys get any sense of what I'm feeling there?
It kind of does. You see, I was thinking just then, and maybe part of my whole discomfort with sequences like this is just, it feels like the episode is having... This will sound weird, but it feels like the episode is almost having too much fun at some points. Because with this sequence, like we go straight from this epic, like dramatic music, Ryan getting slapped in slow-mo, then we get Rosa Parks showing up, and the character's like, oh my god, Rosa Parks, brilliant! it feels like it's playing around.
It feels like an episode of Arthur, or like some very special episode. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's that kind of cartoonish, like it feels socially conscious, but it's like a very cartoonish way of doing it, and that feels weird in live action and with quite serious, interactions happening.
I've seen speculation online about what these initials on the suitcase mean.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that did make me smile was a Great Face of Bo, GFB, and someone said, and I saw another one about is it a descendant of Blake, of James Blake the driver, because it ends with the B and so on. So it's been very interesting reading those.
Does it mean anything?
I saw some speculation that it could be something quite rude, which I should not repeat here. Yes, people had their theories.
GFB. Oh, okay.
Interesting that Mallory looks at online reactions like that, and some interesting sci-fi theorizing, I guess, for the initials there.
It kind of illustrates I guess a conflict between the way fans like to look at the show, or maybe how they've been trained to look at the show under RTD and Moffat, and probably more so Moffat, like of looking for clues and trying to find like details and hints like that about what might be going on with this villain, like where's he from, who is he, like what does the stuff he carries around with him tell us about him, whereas there's not really actually stuff to find in that vein in the episode to begin with.
Yeah.
The Doctor's jacket reappearing in Flesh and Stone broke everyone's brains forever.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa, what are you doing? That is vandalism. We'll have to pay for that.
Don't worry, special pen.
No, pack it in. You ain't Banksy.
Or am I? Rose takes the bus. 1st of December.
I love that so much.
It tickles me every time. Evening.
I think that's a really solid joke.
Yes, all right.
Tell me if I'm reading this wrong, but Mallory joyously laughing at it and saying how she loves it every time, I get the impression she's not talking about her own writing there. Like, is the assumption the line came from Chibnall?
I don't think there's enough to really solidly conclude either way. Like, I can see like how it maybe comes off like it wasn't but I think it also theoretically possibly could be. Sometimes people really enjoy their own writing. I mean,
If she's proud of her joke, then yeah, more power to her.
I do that.
Yeah, same.
I laugh at my own jokes, shamelessly. Do we know if Blackman did a draft and then Chibnall redrafted it, or whether she outlined it and he scripted it?
We don't have a great deal of clarity there. If there's eventually complete history books done on Series 11, like there has been for the rest of the show, with access to the varied drafts for episodes like those books get, we might learn more. We did hear Malorie mention writing her outline earlier in the commentary. She has a 2019 interview with Doctor Who magazine, and it doesn't touch on who wrote what or drafts at all. It's mostly about the response to the episode and her love of sci-fi. In her words, a lot of people were surprised we were so direct in taking that subject and incorporating it into sci-fi. I think they were afraid Rosa would lose her agency, that the Doctor would sweep in and make everything all right. But Chris and I were always very clear that, though this is a Doctor Who story, it shouldn't take anything away from Rosa. Monsters don't all have to be made of rubber. Monsters come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes it perhaps makes people more uncomfortable when the monsters look a little more familiar. In this instance, it was very satisfying when Ryan sent him back to be with dinosaurs, where he belongs. She talks a bit about racial attitudes being an ever-present reality of her life. She says, "It's how you're treated by various institutions. I will go into a shop and be followed around by a store detective. I've never yet managed to get through airport customs without being pulled over and having my bag searched. It's a constant reinforcement of your otherness, as it were," which is one of the reasons why, with this episode, it was important to show that it's not just a thing of the past. Later on in the interview, the second page of it, she says, "I've always loved sci-fi. I love the license it gives you to hold up a mirror to the world." The interview talks about how she got hooked on Doctor Who during John Pertwee's era, although she particularly loved Tom Baker. And the interview ends with, "There's room, especially in such a broad church as Doctor Who, for so many different types of stories from so many different perspectives." Now, all that sort of stuff doesn't necessarily mean Malorie is responsible for all the sci-fi elements of the episode or anything like that. But it does really irk me when I see people ascribe the sci-fi elements of this episode to Chibnall kind of singularly or just automatically, because I feel that really discredits and ignores Malorie's own style, interests, personality, person in general. And it makes a really discomforting kind of conflation that Malorie is the black writer Chibnall brought on, so therefore she wrote the socially minded stuff and Chibnall is the sci-fi dork and he wrote all the sci-fi stuff. I think it's a really ugly kind of assumption. It's like it implies Malorie isn't or can't be a sci-fi fan and writer in her own right. It's really ugly stuff. Anyway, the Making of Series 11 booklet that came with this issue of Doctor Who magazine, 539, which I referred to in our last Chibnall commentary discussion quite a bit to sort out how the original order for Series 11 worked before it was reshuffled. That booklet has no information on Rosa drafts. So my assumption would be a fairly traditional case of Chibnall came up with a brief, we know that for certain, and then my thinking would be that Malorie came up with the outline she mentioned earlier, based on that Chibnall brief, and then she, as the guest writer, wrote the first drafts of the episode. Chibnall fiddled and contributed and guided to where he wanted the episode to go, and it was just a regular back and forth from there. That would be my assumption, but we don't know super conclusively. We just know to be wary when people make big assumptions about that process.
That makes sense, because the Chibnallisms, for want of a better word, feel like they're both quite structural and specific. So if he was involved at both the early outlining stages and the redrafting, that would make sense to me, I think.
Yeah.
The scene at the beginning, especially where they're piloting, the Doctor can't pilot the TARDIS yet, that feels overwhelmingly Chibnall, presumably because it was added quite late in the game, because that's the only thing that ties this to the beginning of the series, right?
Pretty much.
That little scene at the beginning is the only thing that puts this chronologically after the Ghost Monument. And it doesn't really hold together because the Doctor can pilot the TARDIS by the end of the episode, so...
It's like archaeological work, trying to piece together how the series was written here, yeah.
I mean, he's a seamstress. I love how much we get to help the Doctor in this one, piece stuff together.
Yeah.
Bathroom.
Seriously.
very seriously.
I mean, Mallory, obviously, as the nature of Doctor Who, you have to occasionally get lots of information across at once. It's quite difficult to write those scenes, I imagine.
Thanks, he doesn't have one of those.
You have to be careful because you can't just be an info dump. It's got to sort of be within the drama. But and I mean, I love the way you kind of about her because doing it at school and so forth. So it's, as you said, it's not just about the Doctor being the font of all knowledge. It's all of them having a part to play within it.
Again, I think that comment of I love it being like this, I think it is still a bit ambiguous, and I don't think it's really a conclusive thing of who wrote what, to be honest. I'm not sure I could concretely say which way I'd swing on that.
That one I'm just more interested in for talking about how to do exposition with the companions.
Again, it's a little bit upsetting, Mandip saying, hey, we get to help with this scene.
Yeah, it's turning into a running theme, isn't it?
We get to do stuff. That's really quite frustrating.
I mean, it reminds me of this episode did feel quite refreshing coming after the Ghost Monument, and also Woman to an extent. When those first two Chibnall scripts were just loaded with just glacial molasses-like exposition, and so to get an episode that felt like it was even moderately functioning like a normal episode, it felt like quite a break from the norm.
I think couching exposition in this kind of scene can work really well. I'm not so thrilled on the actual content of what they're expositioning, and I'm not convinced that any of that is really important to the episode. But having all the companions get around and brainstorm what they know about the event that they're stuck in, that's a good way of couching a lot of information without it being overwhelming. I think that's fine. Doctor Who has to do it sometimes, like they say.
Kablam in Series 11, I also felt that I had a lot of issues with the episode, but the very basic fundamentals of how it split up the characters and how it handled the characters felt different to Chibnall to me. Yeah.
People are real mad about exposition as a concept, but I mean, all stories are inherently a narrator expositing something, and it's really not an issue if you make it interesting and fun, as with anything, right? If you're not worried about an exposition sequence being too exposition-y, if it's fun, if the Doctor's explaining with a diagram how being in space makes your eyeballs boil, you frame it, you make it interesting enough, you can get any amount of exposition in. It's just about couching it well, which Chibnall struggles with.
The cup of soup exposition in the climax of the 50th to Clara, tiny bit of an ask, all that stuff. Well enough in time, cleverly intercutting exposition about the time dilation when we're cutting back to Bill and then the Doctor explaining. That's so brilliantly. It's part of the storytelling, how the exposition is in a different time than Bill. Yeah, there's always ways to make it interesting, for sure.
The first half of the Wedding of River Song, all exposition. And that's flashing back to it, but it's all just explaining how... Because all narrative, the idea that there's a hard line between the presentational of narrative happening in the instant right now and narrative happening beforehand. The climax of the film Smoke is just this dude telling a story. After the whole film's done, this dude just sits down and tells a story, and it's one shot for 10 minutes. There's no hard line. People act like there's a hard line between what's exposition and what's not. But all narrative is exposition and all exposition is narrative. You just need to make it good. This is just me talking about script writing now.
Yeah.
I happen to know a couple of mongrels. Negro boy, Mexican girl.
I don't recognise anyone by that description.
See,
I love that.
Negro's been going around picking fights with...
The Doctor's face and just the way she delivered that.
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's a very Chibnall era thing where it's like you've outwitted the bad guy through the clever little loophole you put in the wording. It's back to that fair play through the universe, making the rules work thing. I just thought that's an interesting occurrence of it there in the episode, and that Mallory seemed to like how Jodie executed it.
Yeah, it's very different to 12 punching a dude, but I don't think it's worse necessarily.
Reminds me of when you see someone like find some clever way to not be racist in a discussion with racists, but they're saying something that's going to get taken as racist, but they've worded it in such a clever way that they themselves will feel good about it. Like, oh, I didn't actually say, a slur, but they'll think I meant it. So aren't I so clever and progressive?
Yeah, my hands are clean.
Yeah.
As if that's what matters.
That's why I dislike that line.
I think it's mainly the context that shapes how we think about that moment, because I think if it was surrounded by, I don't know, like any other scenes of the Doctor, I guess just being more proactive and less all about maintaining the status quo and so on and so forth. Like, I think a little moment like that where the Doctor maintains some sort of internal sense of like purity by refusing to play along with the racist language of this guy. It wouldn't feel quite as like complicit as it does here in the context of her being complicit in general. If you see what I mean.
Ultimately, it's a story about the Doctor being complicit in racism, and that's like the point. So in another story, this as a difficult moment where the Doctor has to sort of sit on her hands, that can work in the right context. I totally agree.
And it sends letters.
Sounds ridiculous. What's your name?
I love that. I mean, that's one thing that lasted from the very first draft right through. So I wondered if that would make it to the end, but it did.
She did write a draft.
So the first draft had the smartphone joke, but do you get a sense of who wrote it or not?
I think she probably wrote it based on.
I think so.
Yeah, and the fact that she sort of remembered as well, the fact that it was there in all the drafts and stuff, it feels like the sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I see that. I mean, I did it myself once, sometimes heaped into like, let's look at the examples of Chibnall's kind of boomer humor type of stuff. Like the resolution Wi-Fi scene is, the hypothesis of it, but there's a lot of other examples. But yeah, I from the commentary, I don't get the sense that Chibnall wrote that one. But I'm sure he liked it.
I mean, I think this is such an important scene to have in the episode, though. I think you're both great in it. When Ryan talks about being angry, how could you not be angry? How can you not? And having to contain it and having to... It's what you both talk about is so powerful. And it tells us that, everything isn't okay now.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think as well is brilliant about this, is it was happening a long time ago, it has changed, but we're still at a place where it still happens, and which I think it makes it relatable to an audience now.
Exactly.
Yep.
Who knows where they'll be 50 years after that? But that's proper change.
And what you see here as well, is so important. It's important to acknowledge that there has been fantastic change.
Yeah.
But really important to acknowledge that
still got a ways to go.
Yaz!
Because if we just pretended it didn't happen, there's certain people of certain ethnicities that just wouldn't be able to relate to it. Because they'd be like, well, it doesn't happen. So then you were people pleasing. But the balance is perfect.
Daily routine, where she works.
Well, I think so.
In my humble opinion.
Driver she refused.
I think, again, I find myself like kind of agreeing with Mandip in terms of the view, not necessarily in terms of how it relates to the episode, but like the thing about how, you can't just act like it's all fine now. Like, obviously that's correct. I think the problem is that the episode kind of does.
Yeah.
Like, even in the scene where Ryan brings up modern racism, we get Yaz minimizing it, like, in response. So instead of just, change has happened and that's good, it's like, things will get better at some point, so just, stop whinging. It's awkward.
And the very fact that there is a scene about modern day racism in an episode about racism, the fact that you need one scene to be about the modern experience that Ryan's got, surely that should be throughout the themes and the content for the whole thing, rather than one discrete reference to how things aren't infinitely better now.
Yeah, something feels quite building blocks about it all. Like, here's the chunk where we deal with modern racism, and now here's the chunk where we're on the bus.
As if they're all discrete types of racism.
Am I off base getting a weird sense of hesitancy in that clip? Like, the way they're all saying, well, there's been fantastic change. I just get an odd sense of, like, You know when everyone in the Spyfall 2 one was not mentioning Sacha's race, and it was like they were not talking about something? I get there, I don't know. The way they're talking feels strange to me.
I think it's inevitable that there's going to be a hesitancy around getting seriously into nitty-gritty on, like, big political issues and, like, seriously sensitive issues and stuff. Like, I think to the extent when... both partly because it's like a British show, a TV show, a BBC show, a children's show, and it's kind of ensconced in that whole, I guess, liberal kind of centrist kind of culture. I guess there's just like a desire to not basically provoke too much, like beyond like the most default lines of what is considered acceptable. Like, oh yeah, obviously everyone can just agree nominally racism bad, yay. So you can say that. But like, but anything more is like fraught. So that's where you get this hesitancy, and people kind of like, even who really shouldn't have anything to worry about, are still kind of like being careful about what they say or how they phrase it.
Yeah, I think that's the function of the episode and the way the story is told. I know, Gig, you wrote about this, of course. It was such a success with the type of people that... You remember when Moffat said back in the day, we've got to make this show for people who...
who voted Brexit. Yeah, he mentioned Brexit, yes. It's also for people who voted Brexit. Those were his words.
Or whatever. He used Brexit as an example, but you could pretty much use anything. The idea is it's a BBC show, therefore it has to apply centristly to everyone. You know, everyone's got to feel represented or, you know, be able to watch the show. Which means when you're trying to do the big racism episode, it gets this very kind of base form, I would say, of just like, weren't things bad then? Yep. Great that they're better now. Like, it's, yeah, of course that's going to go gangbusters with people today, including some racist people. Of course they're going to love that, because it's such a nothingy statement that people can praise it to high heaven and feel good about praising it to high heaven. If you're going to tell a story more specifically about racism, you're going to ruffle some racist feathers. And so I think it's interesting, the hesitation in their talk there, and I think the hesitation in the episode is part of why it was such a success.
Is Mercer white? I couldn't find a picture, because Alex Mercer is a famous video game character.
Yeah, he appears to be, as far as I'm aware. I've seen him in some Doctor Who magazine and BBC blogs things. I feel somewhat awkward answering a question like that, in that I am aware of how that all sounds, but it's knowledge we'd naturally have of the others involved here. And since this episode and literally what these commentators are saying here is in there by the DVD for this commentary, it concerns race, I think it's a fair enough thing to clear up. Mercer was also a producer on Stephen Moffat's 2022 Inside Man, for whatever that's worth. It is probably also worth mentioning here that the director of Rosa and the Ghost Monument, who we'll hear more about later in this commentary, is black. He's actually the first black director of Doctor Who. Took about 55 years for that. Isn't that grim? I've seen people kind of push back on that before by pointing out the very first Doctor Who director was, of course, Waris Hussein, who is South Asian. Anyway, Mark Tonderai is British Zimbabwean. And apart from directing the second and third episode of Series 11, he will also be directing in RTD2, Russell T Davies Series 14, doing Shruti Gatwa's first Christmas episode, as well as another episode in Block 2 of that series. But back with Series 11 in this commentary, Mandip South Asian, Malorie black, Alex Mercer white.
I'm not drawing any broad statements, but I think there is a real tension in that commentary, where slightly uncomfortably, I think, Mercer's saying, good that things are better now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it feels slightly off base to me.
I'm not rushing us into it, but the next clip from Mercer is really interesting. But yeah, I feel like maybe this commentary should have been...
Didn't need the token white guy?
Yeah.
He's already on the Demons commentary and some other ones where he has some interesting stuff to say. But I think it was probably just not thinking through.
He was the only guy they could get in. Like, he's the only one who's around.
It's interesting because he feels like a sort of limiting agent on the conversation, bringing it back down. Because he keeps saying... But good news, things are all right now. Things are doing better. He feels like he's getting in the way of their conversation, to be honest.
Do you want to hear how he describes the episode?
Yeah, sure.
Next little one. Let's listen.
Blake.
How'd you know that?
Well, your nan, when she found out I was a bus driver, said...
Oh, the bus. I was going to bang on about the bus for a minute. This is probably going to be really boring, sorry. But yeah, but it's you know, there are many complications, which, you know, challenges to making this episode. As I said, foreign shoot, getting everything you need in 2 different continents, getting it so, and then obviously it's very largely a story about a bus. It's not about a bus, but people getting on and off a bus. So we.
That's the classic.
Oh no!
That's one for the back of the box set. You know, enshrined in history. One for the trailer. It's not a story about a bus. It's about people getting on and off a bus. Like from a production perspective, maybe that's how it comes across when you're actually trying to sort out the logistics of filming an episode with the bus in it. But yeah, the optics are what they are.
I get that things get abstracted, and if your main job has been trying to secure a bus you can shoot on, then sure, that's what you focus on. But maybe that's not what the episode's about.
I mean, you never want to focus in on something like in a decontextualized way, but I feel like there's a couple of comments at this point. And sometimes, I mean, you're on a commentary, you know you're being recorded. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the fact that he kind of stops himself, because he says it's a story about a bus, and then he corrects himself, because he knows that's obviously reductive, the story. So he corrects himself and then says, it's about people getting on and off a bus. That's what he goes with. That's great. That's hilarious.
You should have used the old Spyfall 2 commentary trick there.
Because a lot of people, I think, assumed she'd just gone and sat in the white section that day and decided on that day I'm gonna do something about it. But I'd read that she hadn't decided; it just happened.
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about Claudette Colvin, who was 15 and she had refused to move. I think it was 9 months before Rosa did, and had gone to court and stuff. And they were thinking, well, could we use her to stop segregation on the buses? But then because she was 15 and then she got pregnant, and they thought she wouldn't be the right symbol or the right person to kind of move the movement forward, move the civil rights movement forward. So then Rosa was part of a group who they knew they wanted to do something, but it's not like she said, on this particular day I'm going to do this particular thing. Because in fact, when she finished work on that day, she got to the bus stop and the bus was absolutely jam-packed. So she thought, well, I'm not getting on that, and went and did a bit of window shopping and then came back and got on that bus. So it wasn't it's as if it was all planned down to the bus and the driver and so forth. But it was just one of those moments where she thought, I'm not moving. So again, it was about what would serve the story and what wouldn't for me, you know. But always being true to her. It was incredibly important for me that we were true to Rosa, and didn't detract, or didn't take away her agency in the story.
There's agency again. You seem to have running themes here.
Yeah.
It's kind of frustrating, there's more context in the commentary about, like, the political dimensions of the civil rights, like, movement than there is in the episode. It's like, ugh.
And that agency in this context means pristine, historical, you know, conserved timelines.
Yeah, it's got to be the right bus.
Yeah. That's what agency is, rather than the actions of a character in a story.
There's a kind of uselessness, I don't know if that's too harsh a word, but like Mallory is clearly very informed. Like, she can quickly explain and contextualize things for Mandip effectively, but like, that's in an audio commentary. That it's not in the episode. So what use was it in the end?
I think, again, it's the broader issue is that, like, when we do get, like, a glimpse into who Rosa hangs out with, it's just, like, the most shallow, like, one-dimensional thing imaginable. So it really just kind of neuters any potential to, like, when we talk about honouring Rosa's agency, but it just kind of presents her as this almost abstracted, just kind of, like, floating, like, normie, basically, like, with who just randomly had enough one day. You know, just like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this all by myself. And that's how you kind of sever her from the wider movement.
There's a kind of reverency that, in a way, can be kind of disrespectful, I think. Like, I think Nina succeeded in making him feel like a person in the episode. Here, maybe it's because Mallory and Chibnall have so much respect for Rosa Parks in a way, but she feels kind of like a doll in the episode to me, like being moved around, and like everyone's careful to keep her in the dollhouse in the exact way she needs to be. And then like Ryan enters the dollhouse and he's like, amazing, look at these dolls I recognize, look at Martin Luther King, and it's like, it feels not respectful to me, because it's to treat racism as like this frozen thing that you can go explore and go, ooh, wow, and then we can exit the dollhouse and go, that was amazing. That's not, I find that poor storytelling.
That's a really good way of putting it, the dollhouse. Like, it just very much, again, it feels like playing around rather than actually like grappling with the stuff.
It's such an interesting decision to have Ryan be the one who's least clued in about the period and the history of it all, because he's then put at the center of it. So in a way, he's the point of view character for the kids in the audience who've never, heard the broad strokes of the story before. But it also means he's not got any complex emotions when he's in that meeting. It's just, wow, look at how much history there is around me. It's not as rich as it would have been if Grace was there,
Yeah. I like on the surface that Ryan doesn't know that much about it as Yaz, because I think it's interesting and probably representational in a lot of ways to have like, it's not doing the most straightforward thing I would think a white writer would do, which would be like, oh, well, the black character will know about the black stuff. It's not doing that. It's like, I think it's more interesting to abstract Ryan a little bit out. Like it's not like he would know everything about Rosa Parks just because of who he is, Yeah.
It feels like it ought to be about Ryan's growth through learning about history that's connected to him, That's what it feels like it ought to be. And in terms of how that materializes, I mean, we get Ryan shooting the laser gun at the racist guy, and that's about it. Like, when it comes to the climactic bus scene, I mean, his perspective is almost like, compared to the amount of close-ups the Doctor gets in that scene, it's just kind of like, well, he's sort of fading into the background by that point. It's a bit strange.
Yeah.
There's something fascinating about the idea that the Doctor and Graham, as the white leads, can't be a part of the story. That they're sort of locked outside. They've got no interiority in this historical context. They're dealing with sci-fi junk, whatever. They're sort of kept out of the real history of it, where Ryan is actually immersed in it. I'm not in the business of fan fixes or anything, but a version of this story where Ryan is actively involved in the whole thing, and the Doctor's keeping her distance because she thinks that's what history is about, and that's sort of her perspective as a white liberal. And Ryan is actively getting involved and maybe breaks that moment of that really quite uncomfortable moment at the end where they all just sit and watch. If you had Ryan be a more active agent in the story, then that's an interesting divide through the perspectives of the characters that would, I think, be quite meaningful.
I think it would have been a great episode for Ryan to do his occasional thing where he kind of smarts against the Doctor, like in Can You Hear Me? This would have been the perfect opportunity for him to take issue with how the Doctor's handling the situation. Would have been a great way to characterize him early on, but instead he's like, oh my god, Dr. King, and then I'm sending you back to the past where you belong, cosmic racist. Like, it's all, yeah.
See, in that commentary clip we watched, I think it might have been Mercer who said, like, to be a situation that would make you so angry, but to have to keep all that anger inside and stuff. This feels like a story where Ryan should get angry, but like, it's almost like,
yeah,
fetishistic of the fact that of the idea of like keeping it all in self and being dignified. And just being sort of, I guess that quiet, noble resistance of, you know what I'm talking about? Just the sort of like, the not basically be getting mad and just sort of being we go high, that kind of thing.
You can even draw it out further. It's like how, liberal Western countries will try and tell you the good way to protest is like how Gandhi did it. Don't do anything. That's the way you do it. Just
don't block any cars.
Yeah. Don't do anything. That's the right way to protest. If you're doing anything, you're doing it wrong.
There's something powerful in the fact that for lots of people, they can't get angry, right? That's simply not an option in these kinds of situations because it's too dangerous. it puts your career at risk or whatever. But that doesn't feel like it's really sort of threaded through the episode. It doesn't feel like that's the emotional focus. Ryan's tension between wanting to do something and being in a position where it's literally just not viable, which I suppose is a bit like what Demons does. Yeah, I think it all comes down to that question of intervention, and it gets slightly muddled in the timelines version of intervention and the sort of social, historical, political version of intervention, and it doesn't quite align the two of them at any point.
It's interesting that Chibnall frames, the big anti-intervention Time Lords as exploitative and evil and all that, and the Doctor's the good one who was exploited by them. And then his Doctor is characterised by, follow the rules and, don't interfere with the racism.
She is the non-intervention Doctor.
Yeah.
In actual fact, there was an extra scene that didn't make it into the final cut. Wasn't it, Mallory, with Fred Gray and Raymond Parks and Martin Luther King, where they talk about the continuing struggle, and Claudette Colvin is mentioned, and just for various reasons, mainly time in the episode, it didn't make the final cut. And I think we can still assume that they have that conversation after we leave them with Ryan serving coffee.
Oh, fuck off.
I love that he says, but it's canon, but it probably still happened.
We could just assume they still have that conversation. What? It doesn't work that way, man.
I love just the mundane, we overran, so that one had to go. Like, what was worth keeping in?
Yeah, that was the scene we decided to cut.
It's just, that was the kind of stuff that just had me, my head in my hands the week this aired, because it's just, the sort of stuff they felt that was worthy of keeping in, and that when, something that kind of important just got, bye. It was what the hell's going on? I guess it's priorities again, that warped sense of priority at work.
And it's, from a production side, it's prioritising the iconography of the historic moment over the actual history, because for, I think, most of the production, symbolised here by Mercer, it's about that iconic moment rather than about the struggle in general, as, is clear throughout everything he said in the commentary.
Yeah, it's so iconic.
It's so iconic.
It's fascinating, this impulse to decontextualise so much stuff in the episode. And it's Mallory's perfectly aware of it, but it's just not coming through, or it comes through and then it's cut down. It's just amazing the lengths this episode goes to, or the people behind the episode go to file it down. It's earlier in the other commentaries we were talking about when figures or periods or issues are too big for Doctor Who episodes, and then how they deal with that, whether they expand Doctor Who to let it fit into that, or whether they cut them off at the hard edge, like with Nor, and they don't let the thing bigger than Doctor Who into it at all, or like Vincent and the Doctor, where they say, well, yeah, let's expand, let's let suicide into Doctor Who and talk about it. Here it's very much we're colouring within, that's a terrible metaphor. It's very much the, we're going to keep it in the Doctor Who confines. Yeah.
I think with this impulse to cut stuff like the social context, but keep it focused on on Rosa, make it true to her. I wanted to be true to her and her agency and stuff. And that kind of trying to make it to deal with that whole thing's being too big for Doctor Who by focusing in on one person. I think the trouble with that is that when you cut out stuff like the social context, you're cutting out part of that person.
Yeah.
Because which is how you end up with this kind of almost dollhouse kind of portrayal of Rosa Parks, because you're removing part of her life that actually shaped her in a really significant way. So you're not actually being true to her by cutting that stuff out. So it's kind of the contradiction.
It's very this era. It's very the Timeless Children, and this era's approach to fair play, and this era's approach to historical characters, that it's there's an ineffable sense of who they are that's important beyond the context. It's Rosa is a great woman, and that's the ineffable important thing, and the context of why was she a great woman, what was she doing, what was the context of what she was doing, how did she decide what she was doing, it's not important. It's just she was a great woman, and so we're going to show that. So it doesn't matter what she was actually doing, which explains who she was and her situation. It's just she's like a statue, she's like a doll.
Yeah, people aren't products of context and choices and character. People are products of what it says in their character bios. any version of the Doctor pre-1 is still the Doctor because they have all the Doctor things and the Doctor iconography, even though they've not lived any of the experiences that actually created that character. It's weirdly, it's non-deterministic, right? Because the determinist view of it would be that you are a result of your actions. So it's non-determinist, but it's also non-free will. It's both at the same time. It's a mess.
Like sort of narrative essentialism, like again, it happens again in Villa Diodati with like the poets, like, oh my god, they're poets, they're great people, their words will change everything. It doesn't matter that they got attacked by a Cybermen, you just can't die, you got to stay alive, keep the timeline, preserve the timeline.
It's not just who Rosa is and like, oh, she's a great woman, look at her, but it's the way the episode treats the very specific day and time and circumstance of her getting on the bus. Like, racism never would have been solved if she didn't get on that bus on that day, this time.
Yeah, I forgot that's the whole premise of the episode, isn't it? The villain's like, oh, your kind won't get above themselves if she doesn't get on that bus. Which is just like, I mean, that's got to be in the like top 5 worst ideas in Ship-Who. It's just, oh god, it's so bad.
It's such a weird, this ineffable sense of it happened that way. That's the important thing. Rosa is Rosa. The bus incident was the bus incident. This is important. Like, it's so weird to actually follow that thought through, and for people to treat this episode as like some amazing progressive statement when it seems insanely patronizing and bizarre to me. It's like, if it wasn't for that situation, racism, wouldn't have been solved, the way they put it. Like, it had to be this bus. Like, that, everything hinged on, like a coincidence, like, on everything just met here. And it wasn't about what people were doing. It wasn't about their agency. It was about everything just had a nice fulcrum where it all connected here in the perfect way. And that's how the Doctor has to preserve it. It's just insanity.
Yeah, it's a version of history where the only significant elements of the civil rights movement are like the 3 bits that white liberals really like. It's like if the plot of the episode was Krasko changing the wording of the I Have a Dream speech, and that'll throw off history.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Kids will never be inspired if he says it a slightly different way.
You have a Big Finish story at the Krasko adventures. He just tries to tweak every last little thing.
I hate it. It's such a totemic. It's such a fucked up way to think of history.
Krasko tries to save Malcolm X or whatever, or just something like that. Change history.
Grandma.
When I wrote this original scene, Martin Luther King wasn't in it, so this is Chris's edition, which I think is perfect, putting him in this.
Dexter Avenue.
Yeah, when I heard this, it doesn't feel that surprising in a way, because in one sense, it's like, oh yeah, of course, Chib would feel it's not obvious enough without the most famous, obvious civil rights character in it, so just chuck him in, It tracks.
And it's so Chibnall that he's just there he's just there to be there. Like, look, it's him.
And surely the point of the scene is that you're revealing that Rosa Parks isn't just a great woman, she's also involved in, organised action. But you get that scene across by having another great historical figure entirely distracting from the sort of social and organised element that is the point of the scene.
It drives me so crazy how much people like this. Like, what is being said here? You're just having an actor stand there going, I'm Martin Luther King, and everyone's like, oh, this is incredible. What an amazing statement this episode is. And it's just throwing around name tags.
My grandma loved Martin Luther King. She had a t-shirt of Martin Luther King.
It's so shallow. It's, yeah.
That's what Krasko's doing. See, he's clever. I'll give him that. He knows. He's not planning on killing or destroying or breaking history. He's planning to nudge it. Just enough so that it doesn't happen. Enough of a stick in the spokes to throw everything off the rails, and now I'm really mixing my transport metaphors. Well, he didn't reckon with us keeping it in place.
See, I must admit, some of my favourite sci-fi stories are these temporal displacement things, these what ifs, like if you went back and killed Hitler, what would happen, and so on, and that whole butterfly effect thing.
Just guarding
so the idea of kind of just nudging history ever so slightly.
We have to make sure.
And if we went back and we just changed one little thing, what would be the repercussions?
Full. So Rosa sits when she's asked to stand for white passengers.
We were complaining about the butterfly effect stuff just a moment ago.
Yeah. I think fundamentally when you apply butterfly effect stuff to a subject matter like this, in fact, like almost the whole premise of kind of butterfly effect sci-fi stories like that, like if one little thing changed, the whole course of history would go blah, blah, blah. Like there are situations in which it makes sense, but there are also kind of I think there's possibly an ideological dimension to it too, because you're kind of drawing a conclusion about how you think the world works and how you think societal change works, and like you're saying you believe it happens based on, you know, which bus or like, you know, which butterfly is flying where, rather than what is happening with people, what groups of people are doing, what the conditions of society are, what the social conditions are. Like you've completely removed any dialectic of history there in favor of just like, history is just a storm of random coincidences. And a lot of history kind of is driven by random coincidences, but some of it kind of isn't. Like there are distinctions you can draw. So, you know, yeah, things might be different, but not necessarily different in the sense that racism won't be solved. You know, if you know what I mean.
If it wasn't one random coincidence, it could have been another. Like, it's a very blinkered end of history view of butterfly effect stories in general. And so when you apply the butterfly effect to something like racism issues, it's just, I really think it doesn't work, because it's placing so much importance on like arbitrary things, and it's kind of depersonalizing and de-empowering people and what people were actually doing and fighting for and thinking, and it's just making it like the butterfly needed to land on that dinosaur or whatever, otherwise the Klan would be out, you know, ruling today. It's just, yeah.
This is one of my real pet issues, and the entire world of thought around time travel stories is rooted so deeply in this fundamentally conservative idea that ours is, you know, the best of all worlds by logical necessity.
Yeah.
That if you change the past at all, our world will be different, and therefore it will be worse. The idea that the present, the way things are now, like you said, the end of history, it's a delicate, perfect thing that needs protecting from any change. You know, and it doesn't matter what that change is. If that change is beating racism in the past, or, you know, making real social progress before its time, that's still bad, because it's changing the present, and the present is good, and it should be conserved.
It's not even, in a lot of cases, like is it not possible that this society is the bad one? You know, it's such a mechanical, and I think even unempathetic way to think about things. It's to think of past people like, well, they had to do this, so I could do this. You know, it's like this, seeing history as a line of dominoes, which is not a very historically minded way to think about things. And I think it's not really clicked into how people felt in the past either. It's a very depersonalized way to think of the past. It's just like, I'm standing on their shoulders so I can be here, but it's not like that's an actual person who was thinking and fighting for things. It does not matter at all if Rosa hadn't, you know, gotten on that specific bus. She could have gotten on another one, or someone else could have done something, or something else could have happened. But that goes totally against the great man of history approach, because it lets you depersonalize what these figures are actually doing, and it lets you just stick it in stone, stick it in amber, and worship this kind of decontextualized version of it that then doesn't really mean anything or empower anyone, because they can't get anything active out of that anymore. It's just like Rosa Parks was amazing because she's Rosa Parks, and we watched the, you know, the TV show on her, and we read the storybook about her, and what was important was she did all these very specific things, and that's the important thing. It's not about, you know, there were legions of people feeling a certain way and fighting for certain things. It's making them meaningless, basically. Yeah. You all know the famous quote I could pull out here.
Sorry, which quote would that be? Sorry.
You know, during the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge, and vulgarizing it. And they omit, obscure, or distort the revolutionary side of this theory, its revolutionary soul. They push to the foreground and extol what is or seems acceptable. is the one I was thinking of.
Right. Yes. Yes, definitely. Okay. Yes, I do definitely know that. Anyway, what I was going to say, that approach to time travel stories and butterfly effect stuff, it's so culturally ubiquitous. Like, it almost feels like it's treated as the default if you're not Stephen Moffat, like, in terms of, like, writing time travel stories. And I wonder, like, it must be one of the ways in which ideology gets reproduced as media, which then just gets reabsorbed and returned up until it becomes almost programming. Like,
yeah.
No, I don't want to say propaganda, but, like, because obviously time travel isn't real, but, like, that way of viewing history just feels like it's part of the whole complex whereby our way of thinking and our way of viewing society and history is just kind of just quietly, just ever so slightly programmed and just like filled in by, you know, our media and our cultural products.
It totally links into the Tesla conversation Mandip and we were having about the power of storytelling. It's not like any time travel writers are going out to condition people, you know, I'm going to show that dastardly Lenin WhatsApp, I'm going to de-empower all the historical figures, you know, watch me run. It's not that, but it's just, it comes at you from all sides, from all facets, because it's ideology. It's like the time travel writers aren't thinking about what they're doing because it's coming from a million other angles as well. It's just part of the culture soaked up and reproduced by artists and everyone else.
It's easier to imagine the end of the world than a more interesting way of doing time travel.
Yeah.
In some of the early drafts, there was also a bit about the fight she had to vote, to be registered to vote, and all the shenanigans they got up to, sort of saying doing the test and then saying no, she didn't get them every single answer right, and it was only African Americans who were expected to get every single answer right, not white people. And then the third time she did it, she could only do the test each year before voting, and in the third year she did the test and she said, I've made a copy of all my answers to make sure, so if you say I haven't passed it again, I'm going to have them checked, and then they actually registered her.
I never knew that about
the registration.
The registration, that's really shocking.
That's why I told my daughter, from the time my daughter was like, you know, a toddler, I said, you make sure you vote when you're able to, because there's been too many people around the world who still can't vote.
Yeah.
And then women having to fight for the vote in this country, and then African Americans having to fight for the vote in the 50s, and still sort of shenanigans going on about who can vote and who can't, and what votes are counted, etc.
Yeah,
so
of course.
It's so important.
Yeah, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
But like those little anecdotes about Rosa's character just again and again show how stubborn and steely, and because she was going to get around that system, she was not going to be treated unfairly.
Well, exactly.
Interesting how that Rosa Parks anecdote links into a lot of the stuff in the episode, in the era even, of like the loopholes, like how she was recognizing the discrimination inherent in the system, you know, that went beyond the wording of, you know, the laws, but the discrimination that was simmering underneath it. And so she found, how can I subvert this? Can I make a way that will force them to recognize, you know, my success in the tests through like a tangible way with her copies of the answers? I thought it was quite an interesting anecdote that would have clicked in quite well to the actual themes of the episode. Shame that didn't make it in.
I mean, at the same time, I think bringing it in a dimension about voting into the episode would just kind of end up like reinforcing all the things that are already problems in the episode, like the whole kind of reduction of all political and kind of social progress down to like, hey, tick the box, yeah, do your civic duty, guys. that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it's endemic of that whole, the difference between the individual and the systemic view of the struggle, in that it's a, like they say, it's a testament to her character that Rosa Parks found her way around the system and was so persistent that she basically forced her own right to vote. But surely it's more so a systemic story. You would want to talk about the systems and why they're there in the first place and how she fought to take them apart, rather than her individual ability to get around them.
Yeah, it's like that superhero approach. Like, look how she managed to sail past the system, and then the system's kind of the biggest story.
It's that tail type. The individual overcoming is always like prioritized. Like, oh my god, so inspiring, such girl boss. Rosa Parks has girl boss energy.
That's what I think the freezing of these figures is. It's like, how can we cast them as individualistic heroes and tear out the systemic, you know, inspiration, you know, people can get from this? How can we make people not think about how Martin Luther King achieved anything, but how can we make people say he would disapprove of this today? How can we kind of do a cult of personality about passive aspects of them instead of, the things they did to successfully subvert systemic stuff. The individualistic view, I think, is very promoted by these type of stories for good reason from their view. And again, it's the messaging is like, you too can be the individual, surpassing the system, is how a lot of these things tend to go, instead of what if it was a different system, or what if we changed the system. It's, you too could get the superpowers, or you too could rise above your station or whatever. Yeah.
You can get your own asteroid.
Exactly, yeah.
Not to draw too many comparisons between real-world issues and the stupid sci-fi nonsense, but the whole arc of Series 12 is about the systemic injustice and refugees being mistreated once they find a home, and it's this big sort of story of empire and colonization, and then big twist, it was actually about an individual person's individuality all along.
Yeah. And
all the systemic conversations crash into one of how important an individual person is.
Yeah, of course. It's what people understand as good storytelling is so focused in the West on individualistic storytelling, because that's what's pervaded all media for you. That it's like, because you grew up saturated in stories about individualistic people succeeding individualistically. If you get a story not doing that, whether it's from your culture or another one, it feels wrong a lot of the time, because you're like, well, this doesn't make sense. I read Save the Cat. Why isn't the person doing this? This is what's going to happen in a story. And it's just because you soak up what storytelling is and you reproduce it.
It's like everything's about Stephen Moffat, but it's like how people kick off so hard against Hellbent for suggesting that another character might be the protagonist of their own story. Right? That's not even generalizing. That's not even expanding the story to be about. That's not even getting rid of the idea of a single protagonist. It's just shifting the focus by one person, and people still weren't happy about it.
I think to extend that example, I'd point to how people sometimes roll their eyes, and they seem to genuinely think it was like a mistake or an oversight that, hey, Bill and Heather had a similar ending to Clara and me. How lazy is that? Instead of going, well, there's a pattern here, like it means something for that to happen in a row. What could that possibly mean, guys? It's, Moffat plagiarized himself, or it didn't mean anything, or what lazy storytelling. It's because it's different. People want the superficial differences, but still getting the same content over and over. It's like how we talked about, The Office and the comfort of TV earlier.
Yeah.
People want the superficial differences. And when you don't get that, even if it's something more interesting being told by the storytelling, it's like, hey, that thing didn't have a different coat of paint. So lazy. What gives?
People want a big invasion story. Well, we've had too many Dalek big invasion stories, and now we've had too many Cybermen big invasion stories. So we need to do Ice Warriors next.
Not everything gets this. Like, you go to like a Dostoevsky forum or something, and people will babble happily about the recurrent themes in his works. But you talk about Robert Shearman audios of someone's, and people are like, this had a similar structure than the other one. What a hack.
Is that because Doctor Who's so broad a sandbox that it gets sort of averaged out to a certain type of thing?
On all these notes, the maddening thing here for me is how this story is received and applauded as some kind of revelation, when it's not even revealing the historical bits and bob that this audio commentary we're looking at is. It's waving around voiceless historical figures, and it's vaguely gesturing at some feeling of the import of history, while it treats everything in this slickly solidified, ahistorical, individualistic, contentless ways. I think there's a real argument this episode is non-educational, if we want to call it that, in how it presents such a stunted, frozen, finished version of a history. Is it even grasping for the, well, I hope you Wikipedia this on your phone during the boring bits, ambitions of something like Spyfall 2, as we talked about in that commentary discussion? It's just so dispiriting. Stories don't have to work this way. A Rosa Parks story certainly doesn't. A Doctor Who Rosa Parks story doesn't have to either. Anyway, let's listen to the next clip.
And again, I've seen speculation about just how far back into the past did he go and so on.
Yeah.
And is it only a few years, and is he going to be back as in another episode, or was it back with the dinosaurs, or was it back to the Big Bang and so on? So that's been fun to read.
Yeah.
interesting ambiguity there. Get a David Lynch vibe, that refusal to elaborate.
No.
Yeah, I remember back in 2018, I was thinking like Krasko will probably pop up again, or, Desolation will be the planet in the finale.
Yeah, we never got the Krasko-Tim Shaw alliance.
Now we have a better handle on this era's storytelling, so we know that these things don't tend to recur. But yeah, it's funny to hear Malorie read the online speculation again.
The thing with the ambiguity over how far back he was sent is kind of it makes a difference between whether Ryan like mildly inconvenience the guy or straight up murder him. So it's like it seems like it should maybe be a bit more important than it is.
I've wondered, is it even possible he got sent back to a time he would find pleasingly racist as well? Like, he might have got a happy ending.
Yeah, God knows.
I wonder, I've been thinking, is that moment of Ryan attacking Krasko, is that supposed to be that moment of transgression where he goes against the Doctor's version of history? Where the Doctor's, light-footed around history and she's going, don't change anything, don't touch anything. And is that meant to be a sort of Ryan striking out against that, doing his own thing? Because it never actually comes up between the two of them, and there's no conversation about it or actual conflict between their views, is there?
The Doctor kind of implicitly shows Ryan how to operate the device. So she doesn't say in so many words like, okay, shoot him with this, but it's like, it's kind of implicit. And I think also because Krasko is the history interferer, getting rid of him also falls back into that pattern of keeping things on track and such and such. So like, I get what you're saying. Like, she doesn't come out and say, okay, blast him with that. But at the same time, I don't think it's really some big, like, Ryan independence from the Doctor, like, going against the Doctor kind of thing.
It's not a character having their own motives.
She's making her companions into weapons. It's the classic Dalek Khan thing.
Ah, yes.
Do you remember when Amy grabbed Liz Ten's hand and smashed the abdicate button against what everyone else wanted? Because she understood the situation better and she had a perspective born out of her empathy and understanding of the other characters in the story.
It's really hard to picture anything like that happening now. Like, I don't know who it would happen or how it would happen. Like, yeah, it's just so far away.
I think this is the only bit that is slightly inaccurate in that in Alabama at between 5:30 and 6 it's still light.
Right.
Because of where they are, sort of.
But that's sure, because it was November, wasn't it? November.
Yeah, but apparently it's still slightly light outside.
I don't know.
But we won't quibble about such things.
Yeah, that's the significant historical inaccuracy.
Yep, seems important.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
I bet that's a result of Krasko's interference. He zapped the sun to make it nighttime. History's been knocked off course. We've been living in an alternate universe from Rosa.
There's clearly an awareness of like the role of history in the episode to be saying something like that. But yeah, that's pretty superficial.
And Andrew Day's song is Rise Up is the unofficial Black Lives Matter anthem as well. But again, I've seen people, it seems to be kind of mixed between those who think this is a brilliant end to it and those who would like to have a sort of more orchestral ending. But I love this song. And I think it works really well. But I think this was Mark's idea, wasn't it?
It was Mark's idea, and I think he knows Andra Day, so we were able to get, he was able to make a direct connection with her. It's a choice, and I think it's really powerful, and I'm always incredibly moved by this episode when I watch it, and I've watched it well over 100 times now, probably.
Interesting to hear it was the director's idea to include the song.
I thought it was interesting how Malorie was talking, like, I know this works for some people and this doesn't work for some people, and it's not really about the ending, it's just about the song in the ending.
Yeah, and just, I guess, like, choices of, like, musical style.
It was such a big conversation at the time, but it's sort of hard to care, I think.
I guess in its own way, the sort of, like, the insistence on orchestras for everything is... It's got its own kind of strange sort of, don't know if ideology is the right word, but like assumptions about what can qualify as serious drama and what like is, flippant or whatever. I mean, I know you're a Wheel of Time fan, so you've seen some opinions and hot takes in that vein.
Oh, people hate the music for being different. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not being like a symphony or like in medieval times. But I agree, Oliver. Like these days, like it's been years now. I kind of had all these thoughts back in 2018 about how like it was kind of maybe sanitizing stuff, or how it was like, you know, presenting stuff in like an accessible kind of poppy way. But like now I'm just like, okay, whatever, I'm fine.
I think it's just like the orchestral orthodoxy that you're talking about. It's just not it's definitely a factor, but there's bigger issues with the ending. Yeah.
Right.
Like even just watching that clip back and then seeing how like we get that focus on the Doctor's face watching Rosa through the window. I'm like, why is the Doctor here? Like, why is the Doctor in this scene?
I know Gig catalogued a lot of them on his blog post for the episode, which is really good. But seeing all the comments online there and elsewhere, like Graham's face, man, you know, Bradley's performance was so emotional in that episode. Did you see Jodie? It's like, oh my God, is there no awareness of what you've wrought when, you know, like they might have been checking out the online commenters, the producers and the writers? Is there no like flagging, are we the baddies? If it's like everyone praising Bradley Walsh in your Rosa Parks episode.
It's so hard for Bradley Walsh. He's never done anything as hard as being in the South in the 50s.
It's so maddening to me because it's like, it's the big profession of claims is like, you know, this is an amazing progressive episode. This is so important. This teaches us so much. And so much of it is, it's like that kind of white liberal view finds it so easy to connect with the episode and with that ending because that's what it's presenting. Such a uncomplicated view of, and it's not even like racism is bad and it's over, or, you know, we still got work to do, but look at what they accomplished. It's very specifically, look at the white interiority here. Look how hard it is for white people to have to, you know, go, this racism sucks, but, you know, what can I do? We've got to let it. It's just amazing that the climax of this supposedly incredible, you know, progressive episode is the white people letting the racism happen, and that's your story. It just blows my mind. The enthusiasm and praise for it online doesn't surprise me, and that's like the depressing thing. Of course people would love that. Why wouldn't they? It's pandering to them.
And what I kind of liked about this, or loved about this, was the fact that the Doctor is actually she's not actually going in and changing things, which is what she's kind of more used to. It's about just guarding history, and she's not even about sort of turning to Rosa and saying, oh, you've got to sit down. It has to be all Rosa.
100%. Yeah, I think we were always so clear on that from the very beginning, didn't we?
Absolutely.
They keep fighting.
I mean, the conversations Chris and I had, even from the outline stage, not even the first draft, was it's got to be about Rosa, it's Rosa's story, and we don't take away her agency.
Recognising her as a living icon.
Yeah, it's fascinating how often the word agency seems to come up behind the scenes with Chibnall. Like, he really seems to know that word and, like, trotting it out in every opportunity. And it's just ironic given how his era has played out with, like, Yaz and just, like, the relative lack of agency some of these characters, even the Doctor at times, like, have.
Is this ephemeral sort of iconographic version of agency which doesn't actually translate to doing anything?
It's like room to do anything, but not doing anything.
Yeah, it's like the idea that all the pre-One Doctors are potential, right?
They have room now, yeah.
It's the idea of storytelling being just putting a question mark on. It's a question, it's an open question. Answer if you like.
What gets me there is Malorie herself talking about the climax is like the Doctor not interfere. It's like you've made a story that is about the white people not interfering with racism. That's what's been accomplished here. It really upsets me, and it blows my mind.
That phrasing of like guarding history again, it's just that ideological thing of like, this is the best of all possible worlds. History is great and must be guarded. Yeah.
I don't want this guarded.
Why are we guarding it? We're guarding it because right now is the best of all possible worlds.
And that's so depressing. It's such a dismal view.
Yeah.
The best we could get is Yaz as a cop and Obama as a president, and that's, you know, the great triumph. That's the limit of our imagination.
And it's so depressing because Demons takes essentially the same broad strokes of an observational remembrance where actually interfering is narratively off limits. And it does it incredibly. And that makes it work, and it makes it mean something. by, careful choice of subject matter and careful framing of all the decisions. And here, the sort of just gross implications of this story.
I think even the reaction between the two episodes, it tells a tale too. I mean, both very acclaimed, but Demons, I often see people, gurgle out, well, the monsters didn't fit the episode, it shouldn't have had the monsters in it. Or, I'm splitting hairs here, but I do see a little more resistance to Demons than to Rosa. And I think it's partly because Rosa is congratulating white people in a very real way, and Demons is not that concerned with the white people in the episode.
And Rosa's messages are uncomplicated.
Yeah.
It's that racism is bad, obviously. Didn't need saying it went assumed. But also that history is good.
Whereas Demons is bringing up the partition and humanizing and showing the issues there, and it's not giving you a happy, well, look, today at India and Pakistan, everything worked out. It's not saying that. Yeah. It's just in the moment of the partition, then the viewers will have the uncomfortable thoughts, that they might have. They're not being patted on the back.
Yeah, Rose is all about the big stupid adventure the characters go on to get the right bus and such, whereas Demons is all about how, they can't do the big Doctor Who adventure thing to save the day or solve the story or anything like that.
Demons goes, this happened and it was traumatic, and you have to sit with that.
Yeah. It's you uncomfortably live in the after effects of the world of Demons, whereas Rose was like, you comfortably live in the successful after effects of Rosa. Thank God for Rosa and getting to the bus on the right time.
Yes, in Rosa, you sit with it, but for only about a couple of minutes, and then you get off the bus and go back home.
For freedom.
It took so long, though. Her whole life.
Yes, it did.
I just feel really lucky that I got to collaborate with Chris on this episode. I just think it's. I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of it.
I think we're all very lucky that you collaborated together to give us such a wonderful script.
Asteroid 284996, also known as Rosa Parks.
Yeah, I found that bit of research. I thought I've got to get that in there. And I thought, that would be a really nice way to end it. Just bringing it back to the sort of the sci-fi bit of it, the asteroid. I gave the asteroid numbers for Einstein and Neil Armstrong, and as well as Rosa. And then we were talking about, should we say, and that one is Neil Armstrong, that one's blah, 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 Einstein, and this one over here is Rosa Parks, 284996 Rosa Parks. And then it was, should we do that? Should we put the other ones in to give it context? But I kind of like the fact that it's just Rosa, but just concentrating on the Rosa asteroid.
I think it's tough, just because, at the end of the day, it's just cosmic real estate. It's really not much of a symbol of anything. In the same sense, in the scene immediately before that, we get all these accounts of how Rosa met with presidents, and Rosa is like, oh my god, so famous and stuff. Wow. And the asteroid is just more of that. Yeah, again, it's lavishing the fact that she became an icon of history, and that's what this whole episode's been doing. History, yay, check out history and stuff.
It's interesting that in this episode they all stare out at a big inanimate object with no impact on the narrative called Rosa Parks, and then at the end they go and look at an asteroid.
No, I think, in Vinay's words, it's symbolism. It's the natural endpoint of the insanely depersonalized way the story treats Rosa Parks, is that we're going to depersonalize her away from, humanity. It's just a rock. That's, it's so contextless and meaningless how Rosa Parks is treated in this episode, and in so many facets of Western society, that a rock is the perfect symbol. It's ludicrous.
The way Malorie Blackman describes being motivated to put this in, she found out about it and she was like, oh, I've got to get that in there. And it's it seems like it was sort of an association process where an asteroid, it's in space, Doctor Who, got to get it in there, right? And it's just linking those things together because they're space and they're cosmic and they're vaguely connected. And it's just sort of doing that free association thing without really, I guess, puzzling out what the links actually are and framing it in a way that actually, I guess, says anything. And I guess that's just kind of a general Chib Who thing. And maybe just a symptom of just doing that whole just make it really approach of Chib Who, of just doing it without necessarily puzzling out the symbolism and the meaning and everything.
We've got 4 of them now. We've got Lovelace's paralysis. We've got Tesla's Messages from Mars. We've got Demons and the Volunteer Army and Rosa's Asteroid, which are all things the writers realised in their research. They found a fun tidbit and, well, I mean, in Vinay's case, obviously, already knew. But the writers knew something from their research and decided to put it in, and that it was important to put in. But I think the Tesla one mechanically fits into the story a lot better and is sort of weaved throughout and built in. And the Demons one is thematically rich and relevant to the themes, and the other two are sort of just trivia.
Okay, from there, we're going to transition from Rosa's commentary to the commentary for Spyfall Part 1. We're not finishing or saying we've settled a lot of those Rosa conversations. We're transitioning them into what we'll glean from this commentary conversation. And this one is from showrunner Chris Chibnall, lead Doctor actor Jodie Whittaker, and companion Ryan actor Tosin Cole. Like I said at the start of all this, bear in mind Spyfall 2, whose commentary, of course, we already discussed. Spyfall 2 and Spyfall 1 are very different beasts. They weren't even filmed in the same production block or by the same director as two-parters the way we tend to conceive of them are. And Spyfall 1 pairs nicely with our conversation over Rosa's commentary here. There's lots more to say on those ideas of conserving history, untenable social myths, redirecting world history, agency, narrative truisms, and more clarity on that kind of script archaeology we would have liked to have done more of with Rosa as well. So let's listen to the first Spyfall 1 clip I've chosen here.
It really pained you to have to be not very good, didn't it?
Yeah, but you know what? I was getting actually the buckets in, and Chris can verify because I can show you can see the rushes, and I was actually making a lot of shots.
Yeah, and I wrote this in because I knew you played basketball.
Yeah, I know.
But then I had to make you not as good because you're Ryan rather
because
than
I'm
Tosin.
Ryan, I know. And I was really upset because I was thinking, damn, they're going to think I'm rubbish.
I think it's The Timeless Children is the episode I think of here, because the Ryan basketball thing in that gets talked of a lot. But there's a little bit of inspo of where the idea of Ryan playing basketball comes from.
There is something interesting about that, about like, having a character play a sport because the actor does, but making the character really shit at the sport. It's like, yeah.
Chibnall kind of retro-engineers a arc, I guess, out of like, Ryan is bad at basketball. I assume the implication is dyspraxia reasons, and then his hero moment in the finale is he's good at basketball. So that's your classic Chibnall 1-2 move. You know, I took it apart, I put it back together. He missed the hoop, he got the hoop.
It would be like making the 12th Doctor really shit at guitar. There's something at the most. I don't want to call it incompetent, but surely the arc here would be that Ryan doesn't take the shot because he thinks he'll miss. And then at the end of the series, when he really has to, he does take the shot. You know, his choice changes. He grows and learns to take the shot that he needs to take, and that links into his arc about coming into himself and going off by his own to fight climate change or whatever. Or goblins?
Gravel creatures, I think is the wording. Gravel creatures.
But instead, it's literally just tension catharsis with no character in between. He can't make the shot, and then he can make the shot.
Even setting aside all the issues with, like, how is dyspraxia being framed if we view a successful physical motor action as the positive outcome to this kind of would-be arc? The bike stuff with Ryan, I think it tries to sidestep those issues by framing perseverance as the triumph rather than actually staying on the bike as the triumph. See the ending of Revolution of the Daleks for that. But in this Series 12 case, however you slice it, how does this Series 12 basketball arc or one-shot, two-shot thing work? If you view the arc as he went from not being able to make the shot in Spyfall 1 to being able to make the shot in the finale, well, doesn't that frame Ryan's dyspraxia as something to be overcome, something he can overcome, a flaw to triumph over? That's obviously wildly untended, but gross. If you view it not in that sort of arcish way and you just see it as, well, sometimes dyspraxic or not, sometimes you can make a shot and sometimes you can't, well, there's no catharsis at all then, is there? Because that's just chance. Or was the dyspraxia just forgotten completely by the finale and it was just viewed as a simple, well, a guy couldn't make a basketball shot earlier and now he can because he's what, his skills improved? I know it's so absurdly slight, and it's like a joke even to call this an arc, but it's also quite difficult to pass.
And it's really odd placing this within the sort of bike bookend, which isn't, very interesting, but it's a functional bookend arc where at the beginning Ryan wants to give up, and at the end he wants to keep going and persevere. In the first scene on top of the hill and the last one. And, it's not very much for 2 seasons of development, but it is change over time resulting from character. And this isn't.
This is fascinating because you do realise now more and more, because I'm a real podcast listener, that like governments, that like online tech has more power, and online currency has more power than anything, than any of our, I suppose, protective services that we think. And it's, knowledge.
Yeah.
So what sparked you to write this? Like what article did you see, or is this something?
There's a book called Sapiens, which I was reading, and obviously he's done a trilogy. The author, Homo Deus, I think is the one. I can't remember the third book, but I was reading those, and the thing that kept coming through was the thing about data and technology, but also he talks about data as a religion, and about how people nowadays they're treating and dataism. The kind of the worship of data above everything else. The religions are going, data's taking over. And so it sort of came from that. So there was that, and that kind of feeds into Lenny's character.
Yeah, because I didn't really understand it until I saw Lenny's speech, and I was like, oh, like snap, like the whole data thing. And even when you see our
you're
phones
like me, you get it if you see it, don't you? So the stuff for me that unless I can see it, I can't read it and take it in. And so
then, it started to make sense, like why we're going dark on the phones and having to survive, and you can't even get away still because of technologies all around us and stuff like that. So
that's like everything started. So that speech at the end is sort of where the story thing started. And also I'd read this article a long time ago, I think even before I took this job, of like the most, like human DNA is the most efficient storage system for data. And then it's those two things together, and then you work backwards from that going, okay, that is the evil plan. How would you try and put that into, happening?
Spyfall comes from, Chibnall reads an article on what you can store in human data, and he also reads Sapiens, and then he works from there. That's computing is part of it now, so presumably he comes up with Barton, and then Ada Lovelace becomes the historical figure he can use, and then at some point he gets the dossier on Noor, so Noor enters into it. We start to see how Spyfall takes shape.
It is what you were saying before, entirely free association. It's you have the idea of computers and how important surveillance is in our modern society, and then he goes, okay, Lovelace, I can see the connection. She invented computers. I'm not quite sure what the thematic connection is there, but there's a sort of mechanical one. And then Noor worked with code, I suppose.
Yeah.
Just a bit of a stretch. That feels more like she's just cool.
I don't think the spy stuff and the computer stuff ever threaded together quite right, but they kind of float around each other.
Which is, so I've long said the thing about Doctor Who does James Bond is that most of the James Bonds are James Bond does something else, right?
Yeah.
It's the one in space, or it's the one underwater, or whatever. So the thing doing Doctor Who does James Bond does technological surveillance is sort of smart, because technological surveillance is just spies again. And so even though it's got 2 layers of sort of aesthetic coating, they fold together quite neatly, but there's not enough pairing spying on you through public services and spying on you through technology. Those two things aren't ever united properly.
I mean, fundamentally, the evil plan of the aliens using big data and the surveillance company and Vor and all that is that they're going to turn human beings into like hard drives or whatever, and doesn't actually have anything to do with the whole surveillance using people's data aspect, the thing that actually inspired the story, that partly inspired the story, it doesn't actually make it into the final episode in any meaningful way. I mean, that speech about you kept clicking agree, like, that's great fun, but it doesn't really have anything to do with, like, Barton's, like, actual plan, or the Kasavin, or any of that. So it's just kind of a thing that's just floating loose, not really exploited.
And there is so much room to connect these ideas, because the way that we sort of tacitly but coercively consent to, data surveillance is the same way that we consent to government, right? We technically sort of consent to it in the broadest sense, but it is really a coerced consent that we don't have any say in. And so the fact that we're being spied on both by the technology that we sort of consent to and the governments that we sort of consent to, and the fact that both that technology and those governments are turning fascist, it's all connected. The episode just doesn't draw it together.
It's funny that the Sapiens connection, a lot of it I'm assuming is him thinking the next stage of humanity is, the hard drives, which is, as good of a take from that book as any. But it's interesting that kind of disparate sciencey stuff he soaks up first. That's like his first building block for an episode. And then it's like the real world relevancy stuff. He sticks to that. And yeah, I like hearing his actual process outlined here.
Has anyone drawn any sort of aesthetic connection in any work between the tick to agree box and the ballot box? Because those are very visually similar things that functionally do the same thing in society. I just think that's an interesting little detail.
To a certain extent, you could almost say it's not really what you're talking about, but The Beast Below kind of has something going on there with the whole consent button getting pressed, that kind of thing. A story that did all of these Spyfall ingredients in a way that actually kind of built on them and exploited them for something interesting. I mean, it would be like the new Curse of Fenric, basically, because, I mean, in terms of complexity, and it's a dizzying array of concepts.
Did you see, did you hear Tosin and Jodie connect with stuff we've earlier been talking about? Mandip and Tesla was the first to talk about it, where the shape of an episode is like its strength is storytelling. Like they're saying, we don't understand the plot until we actually see it visually realised, which I know some could do a cheap dunk on, they don't understand the script, which, yeah, I guess to a degree, but I think, again, it kind of links in with this idea of it's really powerful what Chibnall's making, just on the virtue of it being television, which is a really effective medium. So it's interesting that even the actors are so under its spell like that.
Also, having a character get on the stage in front of loads of people and do a speech, like declaring like the theme or like the point of the episode is kind of, it's hard to miss. Like it kind of makes me wish Chibnall would do that a lot more, just because then that would give maybe a veneer of intentionality to his writing. Although we might get dialogue like Swarm and Azure's like viewpoint on why reality should be destroyed. So maybe not. I don't know.
I wonder what he read to ferment that.
Hey, watch this little trip.
Where?
It's coming up. Yep.
On purpose?
Yeah.
Is that one? Yeah, God, nice. It's so hammy.
Come on. Nervous. You know what I mean? It's little nuances, man.
Okay.
I think it's interesting for Tosin to come up with some of the dyspraxia-informed stuff, for it not to be in the scripts, which we talked about being a bit micromanagey at times, but he's come up himself with that little Ryan character beat there.
The fact that he draws attention to it in the commentary, like, that sort of needs to be, like, acknowledged for, like, the stuff he's putting into the character. Like, it's endearing, but, like, it just kind of reminds you of just, I don't want to say sad, but, like, it's just like, it's the thing that's like going so relatively undealt with in the episodes and his character at large. So it's kind of like the fact that he's kind of here just sort of seeking like recognition for it is kind of...
It reminds me of Mandip at this 2022's Gallifrey 1 convention, talking about how she learnt to like react in the background of scenes to, further that character. It's like, I'm glad you guys are feeling ownership of your character and trying to realise them, but like, I wish the show was serving you more here.
I had to put in that line in ADR about look at that thing in the case, because obviously when I was writing episode 2, when we were shooting episode 1, I was like, the Silver Lady needs to be in his office, and then I forgot to put in a line going, look at the thing in the office, and thank you for doing it in ADR.
No worries, man. Happy to help. Happy to be of service. All good.
Chibnall just sort of forgot about the Silver Lady.
Yeah, so he was writing episode 2 as they were shooting episode 1.
Chaos in Cardiff.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's from the horse's mouth. I don't believe that's how, like, rewriting, sure, but yeah, I thought scripts got done earlier than that.
Yeah, it's flying by the seat of the pants, especially considering it's a two-parter. Like, it's literally the same story, so, extended over two episodes. And so it was literally unfinished as they were shooting it, is essentially what we're saying here.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about disconnections or lack of coherence in the episode, I mean, look what the writer is saying. He's saying he had to go tell them to ADR stuff in the first episode to make the plot of the second episode work because he was still writing it. It's like, I don't know, people have this impulse to shout down, Series 12 had no production issues. You're listening to a crazy lie, spread by
NMDs,
evil YouTube channels. And there's some of that, sure, but are you actually suggesting there was nothing weird about Series 12's production? The showrunner disagrees with you.
I mean, it really embodies that idea of making it up as you go along. And I think that's what you get. Like, when you're writing stuff on such short notice like this, you just get kind of half-baked scripts and ideas. And it reaches the point where even trying to criticize them like normal television becomes kind of hard, because it's like, well, if you left writing it to the last minute, like, you couldn't exactly have done any better, could you? So there you go.
That's the thing. The whole thing's just a big category error. There's no way of describing this in terms that you describe TV, right? It's not bad at fulfilling the goal that it's got. It's just incomprehensible a lot of the time. Saying that the threads don't feel like they connect properly in the Spyfall 2-parter, duh. Of course they don't connect properly. There's nothing to connect them. They're barely even coexistent.
I think it's interesting to remember in the Spyfall 2 commentary how the actresses were talking about the episode overrunning. I think you increasingly get this chaotic sense where so he's writing episode 2 as they're shooting episode 1, and then episode 2 overruns, and then in Orphan 55, pay attention to what shots the dregs are in and what shots the actors are in. Clearly something went weird there. Yeah, there's a lot of, and when the showrunner himself is like explaining these things, I don't understand how some people will argue, no, Series 12's production was completely normal. Like, you're getting the actual writers say it's not.
See, you wouldn't necessarily think, like, if you didn't know any better, that, like, someone writing a script at the last minute would end up producing something that's too long. But, like, they absolutely would, because, like, you don't have time to actually cut it down and edit it out and reconceptualize it, think about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, people should know this if they've had to write essays for school or uni or anything. If no planning often just leads to rambling, and it's gonna go on for too long. It's same. If you don't have a shot list for a TV episode or something, you might end up over because you don't understand what you need, and so you don't know the shape of it. So overrunning is completely normal for disorganized things. Absolutely.
If I had more time, I would have wrote a shorter letter.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also the sort of the meta internal gag of when he says there's all the history about the Doctor, a lot of inconsistencies. That's the thing about the continuity of Doctor Who, is none of it really adds up. Yeah. And it's
just interesting to be said in a Series 12 commentary. I think that note about the continuity, none of it really adds up in Doctor Who. I'm not contesting that. I just think it's interesting, in the same series that he did some wild continuity moves.
Yeah, and sold the Morbius doctors.
Yeah, reverence to the brain of Morbius to none of it really adds up. It's interesting.
Perhaps his whole quest was try to get it to add up by resolving the great Morbius doctor inconsistency.
I wonder what his take on that actually is. I'm not sure there's any way to divine it, but does he want it to line up like the Morbius Doctor unit timeline things seem to suggest, or does he not care and is just adding his things that he likes because he likes them?
I think he must surely take some pleasure from scribbling in on the blanks, but not necessarily from bothering to think about whether it all matches up or anything like that. I think it's just like seeing a blank and scribbling in it. That's the thing.
Another good hairdo for Mandip Gill. Oh, L'Oreal.
I love her little lean into Sacha here. Just that little
flirty vibe.
Yeah, but it's great that lovely little detail.
Yeah. Ryan didn't get none of that, did he?
I think it's the nature of when you have no concrete direction for a character or what you're going to do with that character. You just get them kind of reaching in any and all directions. So you get really random shit, like Yaz having like a 2-second flirtation with the master. Like, it's just very odd. I mean, I guess it's just that symptom of a general crisis of lack of intentionality in general. So it's just another symptom of the whole thing.
That's the thing. It doesn't matter that the end point isn't planned of any given story, because it never is. It's TV. It's defined by its fluidity and ever-shifting, changing for circumstance. But if you have a clear core of a character, like, I don't know, Amy's defined by her childhood, the impact that the Doctor had on her childhood and the way that impacts her relationship with Rory, and everything that comes after, right up until our last episode, is built on that central drama. And whether she had left at the end of Series 5 or Series 6, you would have seen that same core being iterated upon, even if not to the eventual end goal. And the same, Clara's a subversive narrative presence, and so everything that comes from her, whenever she had left, and obviously Jenna Coleman was planning on leaving at different times through her run, anytime she had left, it would have been an ending based on the central core of her character and what she represents. But the fact that you don't have that for Yaz means that it just feels like throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, right?
Yeah.
Because also he did different things on different takes as well. He's so creative as an actor, and actually in the edit, we had just choices.
Yeah.
But they were all brilliant.
Cockpit bomb. Short fuse. I can relate to that.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like seeing an actor take control of a scene when you're all in control of it.
No.
But he takes the rhythm as well.
I really wish Sacha was playing a good character.
Yeah.
That commentary, the last whole section, is them all heaping praise on Sacha. That's but a small excerpt of the compliments they have for him. But I think the specific things they were saying were interesting. Maybe it comes back to when we were talking about the micromanagey scripts. Like, there's not much room when you have So Sad for how you can perform something. And for them to be like, wow, when Sacha is doing different things on different takes, maybe it's kind of related to his script style, that he's amazed by an actor
taking the initiative,
giving a bunch of different ideas for a scene.
I guess because of the nature of the character, he can do more stuff with it. He can be more wacky. He can jump between tones really quickly, where no other character has that sort of dynamicism built in.
That mercurial quality.
Yeah, so he can act in the role, even if I don't love the performance, but he can do stuff with it. He can take it in a different direction than the words that are written. And no other actor really has that luxury.
It was kind of a running theme in Chip Who, including Jack Robertson in Arachnids. Whenever you get a big cameo villain come in, and the actor would actually be having fun with the part, while the main cast were just kind of trapped in their little box of cringe, and just kind of floating around being not as good. It's the same thing with Alan Cumming in The Witchfinders, and now Sacha as the Master. You always get the villain coming in having more fun than the main cast.
Yeah, and Swarm.
Yeah, and Swarm, of course.
Yeah.
Actually having some fun with it.
Oliver, you earlier said that you had a larger thing to say that you were waiting until we'd gone through the Spyfall 1 clips to talk about. So why don't you launch into that now?
Right, so we've been doing this. It's not come up so much with Spyfall 1, but we've been doing this overview of historical stories, which all of them, to a lesser or greater extent, are about preserving history, and this being the best of all worlds, and that conservative idea that you can't change the past because you risk changing the present, and any change to the present is scary and bad. And some of the episodes handle that better than others. Tesla mostly dodges it. Demons turns it into something genuinely interesting. Rosa and Spyfall both, basically fail. But I think, as currently, the idea of this being the best of all worlds becomes more untenable as a social myth. As we as a community, as a society, stop believing in the possibility, the absurd idea that this is the best things can be. It seems like the way time travel is written, or the way that, I guess, sort of existential universal sci-fi is written, is shifting too. I think it was probably in regards to the Vanquishers, but I'm not sure, about the multiverse stuff, about how many big franchises are doing multiverses, and specifically untethering multiverses. And I wonder if there is some unconscious effort there to... I think that's definitely a reflection of the idea that we roundly agree this can't possibly be the best of all worlds. But I wonder if that is a subconscious reflection of the idea that we're not allowed to change this world.
Yeah.
So this can't possibly be the best of all worlds, but we're also not allowed to change it. The conservative ideal is clashing up against the actual material fact of this as a really quite shit world. And so the outcome, the sort of solution that sci-fi fiction has found is there are other worlds, and they might be better or worse, but don't try to change this one, because there's other ones. There's other ones just away, just off screen, over there. There's a multiverse of worlds, and we're being, I guess, sort of tempted through. The Tecteun figures are villainously saying, oh, you want another world, do you? You're not happy with this one? I think there's something there about the collapsing of the idea of this being the perfect world, and how that's influenced the boom of multiverse fiction, especially franchises that weren't about multiverses suddenly becoming about multiverses. Stuff like Doctor Who has been about preserving one timeline, and then come Flux, our timeline is ruined, and the temptation is to abandon it for another one. I wonder if there's some broad social trend there.
Certainly, it seems like the idea of there's a redirecting of the impulse to change the history of the world into, redirecting it into imagining all these other alternative worlds that are very much separate from ours, or severed from it by some impassable barrier that might break down and cause lots of dangerous things to happen. And that's kind of dotted all over the place. It's quite interesting, thing to observe there. And obviously you need to do some sort of big study to see, if there's been any big shifts over time, but it's, it's an interesting kind of thing to connect in with the time travel stuff.
And I wonder if there's some tension there between episodic and serialized stories, where the very idea of lasting consequences is being avoided by multiverse stories, because, there's an infinite number of every character and don't worry about it. And obviously that's good for capital, because it means you can just keep making Iron Man movies with fucking whoever, it doesn't matter. And nothing that happens can ever matter. It also means you're asked not to actually worry about material concerns, because multiverse, everything's fine. There's a multiverse where it's fine, don't worry too much about it.
Another part of it is that, in the sense that it kind of erases the idea of rewriting or redoing a story in favour of having all the different versions of a story share one, larger multi-reality. So, rather than, okay, we've just redone Spider-Man, we're redoing Spider-Man, this is now, okay, all the three Spider-Men just exist together in one larger multiverse. Everything, it's all true. It's all under one unified version of truth. These aren't stories. These are all their own little realities, little blinking particles of reality, one big reality. And I guess that kind of erases the idea of being able to go back and rewrite a story and actively redo it, revise it, because it's just folding everything into this, I guess, concrete fixed truth again. Yeah, it's a bit abstract, but yeah.
It's 5 different, when you go to the supermarket and there's 5 different identical brands of detergent called, Fizzle and Smack and whatever. And they're all exactly the same in the same box and everything, but you've got a choice between them. You're given choice between identical options in the same way. It's like making a market of the multiverse, right? You don't need to let go of old Spider-Man or whatever, because you can have them all, and they're all yours, and you just got to pay for one of them, and you can pick your one, and there's no hard decisions.
I think the fake agency idea with the supermarket stuff links back into a lot of the approach to character in the episodes we talked about. It's that kind of frozen way of looking at things.
I see where you're going with that, like fake agency. Like, yeah, it does that idea of like just like a false form of like choice or whatever. It is there. Like, I'm not quite sure what the exact words to kind of put it all together are, but I do see it. I guess it's just a defining characteristic of this kind of modern, I guess, liberal society, is this idea of like, you are independent, you're girl boss, you have the choice, and just erasing the ways in which we're actually coerced or compelled into consenting to this or whatever, and we keep clicking agree.
I think the other link with how these episodes treat history a lot of the time is it's not necessarily even multiversal stuff needed to kind of satiate people, to kind of settle people with lack of change or, you know, the world not being in a great state. I think it can work with the kind of time loop thing and narrative paralysis thing again, because there's a kind of weird paradoxical link between the end of history approach and the kind of eternal progress approach. The progress approach, like society is always improving, you know, technology is always improving, is not really true, but it's really foundational to Western thinking in particular. And so I think how a lot of these episodes treat tech and link tech to like success or, you know, cultural success or, you know, vindication of certain figures links into that again. It's like the wheel keeps on turning. Things are eventually set right in history per Tesla because eventually we drive Teslas. You know, it's that link. It's like society moves forward and we've got the fixed society now, and technology is going to keep improving, and that's why our society is fixed and better. It, like, you know how people will like genuinely think people 1,000 years ago were stupider than they were now? Mm-hmm. Which is nonsense, but they think we have more knowledge, therefore we have more intelligence, which isn't true. But people think like that because that's something really soaked into the culture, is to think that way. We have more technology and we can access it quicker now, therefore we are more intelligent. And that's fraught with so many assumptions, but it's the way people think. So I think a lot of these episodes and their view of history is not only that kind of we've ended history, so it's, you know, we've ended history, but things are still improving. But that's part of the improvement of history now, is now at the stage where there can be a black president, which means we've fixed it. Even though there's still white presidents, we fixed it because they can be black now too, which couldn't have happened in the Rosa episode. And it's a really dismal view of history and of the present. And it's why I find so many of the inspirational aspects of historicals sometimes really sad, especially with some of the stuff in Rosa.
The concept of change and opposition has been co-opted into the status quo, right? We now accept that things are going to keep improving, progress will happen slowly, and that's no longer a subversive or against the status quo. That is now baked into the status quo.
I think there's a link with storytelling and with society things there, in that it's all built off truisms. You know, the truisms about storytelling we were talking about earlier, like it has to be individualistic and narratives have to work this way. It's all, you're just saying that. You know, there's no actual grounding to any of this. We've just all agreed, okay. And it's the same as, you know, this brand is better cereal than this brand, or this group of people are, you know, meaningfully different from this group of people apparently, therefore it's imperative that you know, vote for one of them. It links back into this web of truisms that we then build off, you know, our understanding of how something is meant to work. Like when Bill's ending comes up to Clara's, hey, that's the same. That's not how narrative works. That's not how season finales work. You do a different thing in the season finale. But that's not really engaging with anything. And it's not really saying anything. You're just saying, hey, other stuff works like that. Great.
In the same way that anti-capitalism is co-opted into capitalism. Are we still talking about Doctor Who? In the same way that anti-capitalism is co-opted into capitalism, the alternate universes, the multiverse, are co-opted into our one universe. The alternative is part of what you have, right? The alternative is just a facet of what exists. So don't change what exists, because any alternative to it exists within what already exists.
Also, simultaneously, I think that idea of like history has ended, therefore we're going to look at other worlds with different histories instead, because our history is finished.
Yeah.
I think that's why the perennial one they revisit is like the 1984 worlds, you know, The Lie of the Land or Orphan 55 in a way, all these worlds like the big thing we're scared of happens. Ooh, you know, and this is how we're going to learn how we need to behave in this world. Orphan 55, you've got to recycle. Otherwise, we're going to turn into goblins everywhere. You know, the Lie of the Land, you've got to Honestly, I can't pass what Woodhouse was doing there, but you've got to not be doing something bad. It's so yeah, that's another way they definitely do this.
You know, the totalitarian lie of the land thing, or Spyfall in this case, is you don't have to worry about fascism until it's wearing Nazi uniform.
Of course, yeah.
You don't need to worry about technology until it's literally making you a hard drive, because that's the future. That's gonna happen one day. One day the Earth will get turned into an alien landscape, but right now, it's fine. We've still got time. Don't worry about it.
It's what frustrates me with stories like Rosa, is they're praised so much for their relevancy, but I really contest that. I don't think its conception of racism is that relevant to anyone right now, because it's treating it as something kind of frozen and not systemic in the way that we understand it. That's like in the commentary, we kept hearing all these slip-ups of, oh, it only affected, that long, or it's different now. And that's really telling because the episode isn't messaging any understanding of racism as it's like it sees it as something that was just eroded thanks to freak actions, and that's the world we're living in now. It's not seeing it as something informed by specific people benefiting from it. It's not seeing it as something informed by class, in any meaningful way. It's just kind of seeing it as there was this bad thing and it's been eroded over time, and now it's much better. We can drive Teslas and things, and Obama's president.
But there's still a cosmic racist in year 5000 who's going to come back and...
there's your depressing realism, is the cosmic clan is still out there in the far future. One of those lovely little super depressing world building touches writers don't seem to think through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I what we're swirling around is definitely that the conceptions of history and the present that all these episodes deal with say so much, even though they're kind of treated as like inherent, or like that's how stories work, but they really say a lot. Absolutely.
Well, that was a diverting interlude. Any more?
I feel like we need a high energy last beat, because we ended on a kind of, yeah, it sucks, doesn't it?
Well, we'll call this chapter in our Chibnall era commentary conversations here. This was part 4, ideology. There'll be high points to come in future, I'm sure. We'll continue to build on all this, the running themes and topics established in the actual commentaries we've heard so far, and recurrent ideas in our own conversations, and some from commenters as well, with looking at the commentaries for War of the Sontarans, the Saranga Conundrum, and where it all began, The Woman Who Fell to Earth in future. For now, please let us know your thoughts on these Rosa and Spyfall 1 commentaries. What was said in them, what might not have been said in them, what we had to say about them, anything we didn't say or cover as well, any or all of your thoughts. Compound our commentary with your comments. And as always, thank you really very much for listening. Cheers.